Welcome to Pathways to Stillness. I'm Dr. Gary Irwin-Kenyon, a gerontologist and Tai Chi instructor. On this show, my co-host Vicki Hogarth and I explore how the practice of stillness can transform the way we see aging, death, and loss, and how it can help us understand our lives as a story.
It's great to be here again with you, Gary. I can't believe how much I'm getting out of the show, but also how much so many of the viewers are already taking from being here with you every week. Can you talk a little bit first about the question that you left off with last time? We were on the topic of aging. We are on the topic of aging again today, but part of this show is doing exercises with the viewers at home.
The exercise that we did last time and now have some responses to is think about your own experiences when you have been out of time. There is no past or future. Are there areas of your life where you could be more in present time? For example, my daughter has discovered that time stops when she's present and genuinely listening to another person's story. If you wish, try to identify some ideas and actions that could help time stop for you, and in this way, invite more stillness in your life.
And I should mention for viewers at home, Gary, that you have a book, Pathways to Stillness, that you wrote, and it's available if people want to follow along with the book at home as well. I know that it sells at McGuire's. Where else is it available?
Sunbury Shores, and then Amazon, Indigo, and the publisher's Friesen Press, and McGuire's and Sunbury Shores in town here.
So yeah, you can follow the exercises in the book as well, and then we engage with you, the audience at home, too, to find out what some of your answers and responses are to the exercises. So the question that you put forward, we have some that people respond to by email. So that email, if you're following at home, is stillness@CHCO.TV, or you can write us on Facebook as well, but it's great to get the reader responses that in the topic of aging, might need my glasses for now. So one of the responses, this one's from Donna. She said, I practice truly listening when someone speaks without thinking about my response. To deepen this, I make eye contact, pausing before reply, and ask thoughtful questions to stay fully engaged in the moment. So it's pretty much exactly the exercise you're putting forward.
Yes, it is, and sometimes that only takes seconds, like being in a grocery store, and the person, the cashier, looks at you, and you can just pause and look at them. In a matter of seconds, it creates a connection that can have stillness attached to it. You can feel that.
This one's from Teresa. She says, immersive activities. I feel timeless when I paint, write, or play music. And to cultivate this feeling more often, I'll schedule uninterrupted creative time, turn off my phone, which I'm sure in this day and age is very important, and allow myself to create without pressure or judgment. And I think maybe as adults, that's something we don't seem to take time to do. We don't value it as much as we should.
Yeah, and that speaks to the bigger picture about stillness, that it kind of, we're invited to take that break in whatever form it might take for you. But it gives you a break. Maybe you could say it breaks up the hamster wheel or the monkey mind by bringing you to the present.
And before I get to the next viewer response, why is stillness for people at home such an important part of our journey into aging, to take these moments to detach from that chronology?
Well, I think we're going to speak about that a bit more later, but it's inviting us to perhaps see aging a different way. In our particular culture, I think you were mentioning in one of our other episodes that the dominant emphasis is on youth. Now it seems to be changing. You see more and more older actors in films and so on, but it's still a focus on youth rather than, so we buy into that outer aging, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. We buy into that outer aging, and don't see any other possible way of looking at our aging.
And another reason why then finding stillness can actually be a nice relief sometimes, when that is the society that we have chosen to live in. Someone else mentioned, this is from Maggie, tech-free mornings. She says, I tend to rush into the day, so to invite more presence, I'll spend my first hour tech-free, sipping coffee slowly, stretching, and setting an intention for the day instead of diving into social media and emails.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's a pretty powerful, and I'm probably guilty of that a little bit myself. Like when I'm having breakfast, I need to put the phone in another room because otherwise I'll be having my cereal and creeping over to grab my phone.
It's definitely, I'm guilty of it for sure because my phone is beside my bed and there's something, I'm not the best morning person. So I think if I woke up earlier, maybe I could appreciate mornings more, but I tend to grab my phone right away, see if I'm missing any emails, and it's not a healthy way to start the day, and it's a really hard habit to break.
I agree with you. It's hard to break.
And speaking of that, someone else says, this is from Murray, he has a nature connection. So being in nature helps me forget about time, he says. I'll take more walks without headphones, sit by the ocean just to listen, and he started gardening to engage with the earth in a way that slows everything down.
Yeah, I think nature's a very powerful pathway to stillness. I mean, it's just there. And if you go in nature and sit or just be quiet for a bit, it sounds funny. I think probably native tradition speaks about this more. It speaks to you. You can feel the trees and the flowers speaking to you. Mm-hmm. So that's obviously a very powerful way of getting to that break in the action.
Something maybe too in this part of the world we could take for granted because we have the ocean outside our door, beautiful trails, but I know when I moved back home, I'd been in the city way too long and it took me some adjusting to get used to even just the stars, but it's definitely something that keeps me centered now. Yeah. And on that note, this is from Stephen. He says savoring food, and it's actually a really beautiful example of something you can do often throughout the day. He says, instead of rushing through meals, I take my time to enjoy each bite, noticing the textures and flavors, and it turns eating into a more mindful experience.
Yeah, that turns out to be an example that John Kabat-Zinn, who started the mindfulness-based stress reduction program out of a Boston hospital, and he teaches people mindfulness, and one of his first exercises is having them take a grape and put it in their mouth. And people who are just coming to the program say, that's kind of weird. But he gets you to texture, flavor, maybe a smell, and to be with that and chew it slowly. And that's how he gets people who have no sense of stillness whatsoever to invite them to try that out, to see what he's talking about.
So another side exercise you could do at home even right now. And definitely something I think too in our culture where we are so rushed all the time. We tend to eat on the go and not stop to enjoy it at all. So really taking the time to do that could add a lot more reflection time in your life. And speaking of that, Sylvia wrote in, she has a gratitude moment. She'll pause throughout the day to reflect on one thing she says I'm grateful for. This simple act can shift my focus to the present and bring a sense of peace.
Yeah, gratitude's another powerful pathway to stillness. Some people have gratitude journals that are recommended to do that every day.
I do think journaling is one of the examples someone else wrote in too. I won't get to all of them, but Terry wrote in to say he tries to let go of the clock. It's hard to do in this day and age when we all have a clock really attached to us in some way. He says, instead of rushing through tasks, I'll experiment with removing time constraints where possible, walking without a destination, or allowing myself to read until I naturally feel I'm done, rather than waiting for the clock to tell me it's time to stop.
Yeah, I think that's, yet again, another good way, because I find, and it's almost inevitable, that so many things in our life right now are time. Like even Tai Chi classes, people come to Tai Chi classes, it's supposed to start at 10 and end at 11, and you can see it if I don't start it at 10 and end at 11. So it's paradoxical maybe, but by staying within that, they will eventually calm down in the class because they have that boundary. So it's not all black and white, I guess.
I want to move in on this episode to talk about what we touched on earlier, which is the difference between inner aging and outer aging. And maybe you can start with the definition of both.
Well, outer aging is aging by the clock, chronological aging. And they say in gerontology that chronological age is an empty variable, which means it doesn't, to know what age somebody is, doesn't tell you much about them. And that gets to be more and more so as people get older, because there's a huge range, even physically, of the onset of various things like hearing and sight and internal organs. So even, in medicine they talk more about functional aging rather than chronological aging. So I joke that I think I told in another episode, but the guy goes to see, the older adult goes to see his doctor, and he says, "What's wrong with you?" He said, "Well, my right knee's really sore." And the patient says, "Well, my left knee's not sore, and it's the same age. What do you expect?" Doctor says, "What do you expect at your age?" Sorry, what do you expect at your age? And he says, "Well, my left knee's the same age, and it's fine." So there's kind of this chronological age or functional age. And then there's something called subjective health, which means I've had a physician friend of mine say that he has had patients that have severe arthritis, and they should be walking with a walker. They shouldn't be able to walk, but they're okay with it. And he said I would say there's some story they tell themselves about this condition. Sometimes they'll say, "Well, look, I know my neighbor so-and-so much worse than me," and so that's already crossing the line in from outer aging into inner aging. But our lives are structured too by clock time, right? And we're not talking only about being older, but the voting age, the age which you can legally have a drink, retirement in terms of pensions, we have chronological age. Retirement in terms of work is illegal, ageism, to refuse somebody on the basis of chronological age. But behind the scenes, ageism is quite insidious. People who are already older will look at an older adult applying for a job, not realizing that they're the same age, but they'll still be sort of prejudiced against that. So outer aging can be a problem that way. Now we're seeing a lot more adults in the workforce. I was just at a Home Depot in St. John, and I needed a new washing machine. And the gentleman who served me, probably a bit younger than me, but not much, and he was an expert because he'd been doing this for such a long time. So he's the person I want to talk to. And so that's changing to some degree, but there's still, the older adults I've run into and on media, there's still a lot of ageism out there. So that's all about outer aging. Plus outer aging has kind of a nasty end to it, right? We're here for a certain amount of time and then we're not here anymore, and we actually don't know when that will be. So those are also existentialist questions. What do we do with that? And what we do with it is, we can either give up, or we also have something in the literature called successful aging. But successful aging, as it's usually defined, is about having enough money, having friends, having health, and then you'll be fine. But you might wonder, is that really for the odd few people maybe? But for most of us, that's not how life goes. It doesn't go the way we think it's going to go. So that's where many folks come to the edge of that. They say, "Well, is this all there is? What do I do here? Keep joining clubs, or to stay desperately to stay alive, or give up?" But there's another way we can, and that's another thing about that is we're trying to control our aging, right? We're trying to do, or by anti-aging products, we're trying to control our aging somehow. But for more and more people, I find that's not working. So an alternative to giving up is to give into it and to accept what's happening, accepting the changes, which starts getting us to talk about journey. The journey is something to entertain, to consider entertaining that as a metaphor. A journey is usually something hopeful and positive, not quite positive thinking. It's another pet peeve of mine where people talk about positive thinking. That's if it works for you, all these things, if they work for you, that's fine. But a lot of people find they can't pull it off. Positive thinking just doesn't get you there. So then there's a double whammy. You didn't get positive, and you feel like a loser because you couldn't get positive. So that's a difficulty too. So the alternative is, the journey is one of hopefulness, because the journey usually is hopeful. We might get sick, we might miss a plane ride, especially in maritime provinces here, our flights canceled. Things happen to us on the journey, but overall it still has a hopefulness to it. Plus, life is a journey that we take with other people. Some we may not like too much, but the opportunity for friendship and love and companionship is there. The journey may be, the end is really, the beginning and the end are really unknown to us. The beginning goes back before we were born to our parents, perhaps back to the Big Bang. We're told that energy from the Big Bang is still with us as we go along. I can't imagine that too much. I can intellectually agree with it. Similarly, with the end of the journey, in some ways we don't die. We die with memories of people who love us. Our life carries on with them. So the journey has a hopefulness and a flexibility to it. We might have choices to go in one direction or another.
Why do you think it's so important to find that meaning, and particularly in the struggles? I think I've always told myself that I'm not always someone who sees things positively, but I can see struggles as character building, as part of the journey, and really those moments that end up making you who you are, and sometimes the moments where you find your purpose too. When you encounter something negative, that sometimes where you see the point of your existence and where you can add something to the world. Yes,
before we came on, we talked about Viktor Frankl, who wrote this wonderful book called Man's Search for Meaning. It has a sexist topic because it was written way back when. But his whole philosophy, he was a neurologist, a philosopher, was to say that he's a survivor of Auschwitz and death camps, and his whole work for his life, he lived to be about 95, was to help people find meaning, because he found meaning through this suffering. So I suspect this topic will overlap into another episode, but there are many these days who would say not only it seems to happen, but there are some teachers these days who say that's the purpose. The purpose of our suffering is to grow. There's a book written by an author whose name I forget at the moment, so I'll pick it up at the next one, who wrote a book called Falling Upwards. So all these losses are actually helping us to go up, to be more free, to be more loving, and to be less afraid of everything. Now, there's a lot of Tai Chi philosophy in terms of developing a practice for getting there that we can make a bridge to at some point.
Sure. Wow.
So the other metaphor that, again, we may touch on today, but we may go into a little bit more, is journey and story. In a way, journey is a type of story, and to look at it, to be willing to look at our life as a story. But just to emphasize the point that it's sort of paradoxical. It seems like most people come to this point of being open to these options through suffering. Not everybody. Sometimes it's a spiritual experience, or just meeting somebody, meeting the right person, and that kind of thing. But for many of us, it's like the 12-step program. I can no longer do this, and I can no longer do it myself. So you start to reach out to something bigger than yourself. That seems to be what this moment is about.
When you're in the thick of that suffering, I wonder if someone as studied and academic as you are, how you're able to deal with it, to cope with it when you're just in the middle of it. How do you handle it?
Yeah, that's a very good point to raise. When it's really, I talk about in the book, there are things that happen to us that are, say, oh yeah, this doesn't feel very good, but I'll be okay, compared to the experiences of, no, I can't deal with this. I don't know what to do. I'm done for. And it's the second type of experience that seems to bring us to this point. So I've had a couple of those experiences in my life where I've literally, where at that moment I could do nothing. I wasn't able to do my practices, they didn't work. And I've since studied about this too. It's not an unusual thing to happen. But in those times, actually the example I give in the book is one of my Tai Chi teachers who found out he wasn't living in the same place, and he found out about what I was going through somehow, and he called me up and he said, my advice to you, Gary, is survive. 1 minute at a time, 1 hour, 1 day, and things will gradually, you won't believe this right now, but things will gradually move. And for some reason, his words, because I respected him as a teacher too, but I also felt this guy's been through something too. He's not bullying me, you know. And that really came in, so it didn't fix anything right away. But he was right. I just kind of lived with it. I didn't know whether I wanted to work anymore, wanted to go away somewhere. I didn't know what to do. But that started the beginning of just things coming back, and then I started to become much more aware of stillness, and I knew what it was intellectually, but I started to value it more and pay attention to it more as something that could be helpful to all of us.
And what about when it's something like aging, where it is something that we're going through, but we know it won't get fully better? I can use the most basic example again of my eyes. Now I know, my vision's never going to get better from this point on. I can only anticipate that it will get worse, but I'm learning to cope with it.
Yeah, it's sort of a joke, but there's a lot of people who, are doing this because they're sort of terrified of any age changes that's a fall from the heights sort of thing. Now, a lot of people fall from the heights much earlier in life, and you can learn a lot from them. But as we get older, and those of us who've been fortunate enough to not have or unfortunate, I don't know how to not have these things happen until later in life, it's a matter of, as what I could talk about more a little bit later, but about being able to re-story these phenomena. So once we realize, well, I don't like this, I can't control it, and I don't like this, so is there another way that I can look at this? Maybe having to wear glasses is not such a big deal. Maybe trying to have cataracts and getting them fixed is not such a big deal, because practically speaking, I can see. Mm-hmm. Getting a hearing aid, I went through myself, this was only a couple of years ago, and my wife Liz was telling me, you need hearing aids, and it's not funny, but I resisted it for quite a while, and finally talked to friends, and that's no big deal. If that's all that happens to you, so it's kind of a way of looking at things in a different way, which does take some practice. Mm-hmm. And I think stillness, whatever practice you do for stillness, can help you relax more, like the Tai Chi or many other forms, can help you relax and not get so uptight about these changes.
So you have an exercise for people at home today. It's right here from your book.
Yes. Can you think of an example in your life where you went beyond or could go beyond outer time aging and its expectations and limitations to your inner aging and find, or you have found, meaning and perhaps some stillness through making that movement?
Do you have an example of that in your own life that would?
Well, it's not my own life, but a close friend who died a couple of years ago. It's a simple example, but it's it's meaningful, I think. He wanted to go, he's British, he was British, and his nephew was getting married in London. And his nephew wanted him to go to London for the wedding. And he said, oh, I'm too old for that, I can't do that. And I said, well, why not? Well, I can't walk through Pearson Airport, you have to walk for a mile to get to the plane. And I said, what? You take a cart. And he said, oh, everybody will think I'm an old fogey if I take the cart. And I said, do you know who rides those carts? The Rolling Stones, the Saudi Arabia knight or whatever, king. I said, all these famous people. I said, they ride those carts. So, okay, I'll think about it. So he thought about it. The next morning he called me up and said, I'm going to go. So I was able to help him through, and he was willing to consider that.
Did you want to end with a Tai Chi exercise for everyone?
Yeah, we can do one today called Wave Your Hands Like a Cloud.
Okay.
So it's starting with your palms up, and you take a breath, come down, cross your palms, and flip them up, and then just float up just in front of you like two mirrors here, and then back over and down. Cross, we do this 3 times. Up, floating up, just like a cloud.
When do you breathe in?
At the beginning of this and on the 4th one. Okay, so now we're down. And then we take a deep breath on the 4th one. And down, and just float down. Yeah, so a deep breath at the 1st one and a deep breath at the 4th one.
So again, that email for Gary is stillness@chco.tv. You can send in your answers to his exercises or just write in your questions for him to address as we go on with the show. It's always exciting. I never know where each episode's going to go. I just know that I'm inspired by the time we are all done. So thank you again today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you all very much for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Pathways to Stillness.